So recently I've been thinking about doing a video on toilets in FPS games because let's be real, that's the kind of hard-hitting content that people come to my channel for. And I've been inspired to do that ever since someone reminded me of that exploding turd in that old Counter-Strike 1.6 map. But then I thought, why not just cut out the middleman and go right to the source, the sewers? I mean, that's where everything that goes into a toilet ends up anyway, right?
It's all pipes!
And it is a bit of a meme that sewer levels in first-person shooters are common, along with also usually being pretty terrible. Well, it's time to put that theory to the test, Sonny Jim, and see if that's the case. I have to start off by saying that this was kind of a hard video to make in the sense of having to narrow everything down. And honestly, after all of my intensive research, I gotta say that full-blown sewer levels aren't all that abundant. But if I went through highlighting every single sewer-like environment, well, then I'd have to name a whole heap of different levels in a whole heap of different games. So what I tried to do here is based off the amount of time you spend in these areas. So as a result, that means that 2 or so minutes you spend in the sewers of Notre Dame in Time Splitters 2 won't make the cut. Either way though, look, I'm bound to miss some, and I guess that's what the comment section's for anyway, so let's just get right into it.
I bet this place just crawling with them damn shit monkeys.
Alright, well, how about we start things off with what might be one of the earliest sewer levels of all time, and that's with Doom 2's second level, the Underhalls. Now look, I know Doom 2 has a lot of somewhat sewer-looking levels, and a lot of the environments in this game are really open to interpretation as to what they're supposed to be, with the player often having to wade through muck that resembles sewer waste. But I think that this is really the only level in the entire game that outright takes place in one specifically. It's also worth bringing up because it's the first time you get your hands on the super shotgun. So, aside from being one of the earliest examples of a sewer level, it's also the first time we got introduced to one of gaming's greatest boomsticks. A weapon that's still being put to good use, even to this day. This level's also got a bit of a fun layout. There's a cool section in those dimly lit areas where you can put some of those explosive barrels to good use. And the heavy placement of zombie men and shotgun sergeants means you can really cause demonic genocide with that super shotgun. Not to mention, it has one of the most chill songs in all of Doom 2's soundtrack. And like all sewer levels should be, it's short. While we're on the subject of Doom, it's also worth talking about a short section in Doom 3's expansion pack, Resurrection of Evil.
I know this sounds crazy, but it's the only way.
Now this one takes place about halfway through the 5th level, and for this one, your character even puts on a helmet to protect himself from what I've got to assume is probably lethal levels of toxic gas. The helmet not only limits and distorts your hearing and vision, but on top of that, you also need to keep an eye on your air supply, which is something that might fall to the wayside considering how distracted you're gonna probably get. Now though this sequence only lasts maybe 5 or so minutes, it's definitely one of the hardest sections of the entire expansion pack, and it almost makes that slow motion power up kind of useless at times, because the demons spawning in are going to outright block the way forward on some of these upper catwalks, and all you can really do is just kind of wait there for them to spawn in. Also, activating slow motion doesn't slow the rate down at which your air supply drops off, which does kind of suck. Still though, there is definitely something unsettling about this area, and why these demons are all just hanging out in a bunch of sewerage tunnels is really anyone's guess. Going back to the 90s again, this time we've got Medal of Honor with a mission early on in the game literally called the Sewer Chase. In this one you failed to meet up with the French resistance and you're now trying to escape through the sewers, avoiding the Nazis who are chasing after you with goddamn attack dogs. Thankfully though, the Resistance has left you a bit of a parting gift in the form of a weapon stash, and let me tell you son, those froggies really know how to butter my biscuit, because they've only gone and left you a goddamn trench gun. Yeah, trench gun, that's World War II slang for a shotgun. And this thing is so badass that Hitler himself is going to feel a bit of a tingle every time you shoot one of the Nazis with this thing. This is also, I think, a great level that really highlights the heroic aspect to Medal of Honor's campaign, making you feel like this one-man, trench gun-wielding killing machine mowing down droves of enemy soldiers as you make your escape, all with Michael Giacchino's music playing in the background. So, overall, this is a good example of a sewer level that isn't going to make you want to kill yourself. Up next we've got Serious Sam, which makes its way onto this list with a sewer level about halfway through the first game, the first encounter. Not to be confused with the second encounter, next encounter, before first encounter, brief encounter, close encounters of the third kind, or Sister Act 2. What makes this level especially annoying though isn't even the setting, because as far as sewer levels go, this one is perfectly manageable. It's instead, I think, the abundance of these electro fissures hiding in the underwater sections that you've got to move through. I mean, first off, not only are they terrifying to look at, looking like some kind of weird eldritch horror, but they also zap off your health pretty damn quickly. Doesn't help either that this level comes at a point in the game before you've even gotten all of the weapons. So you're kind of limited in how you can deal with all of this shit. No pun intended. Thankfully though, it is over pretty quickly and just more of a detour before the second half of the campaign when things start to really ramp up. Pro Team also brought a sewer level back again for the sequel, Serious Sam 2, and this time you're trapped in the royal sewers of Kingsburg, because the only thing better than normal shit is regal shit.
Oh, even the royal poo stinks! Get us out of here!
In this level you're moving through the kind of water that looks like it could turn infant turtles into crime-fighting ninjas, and coming up against enemies like zombies, stockbrokers and green lizards, which all have a pretty noxious looking gas cloud surrounding them. Topped off with a fight in a large opened up area as a bunch of clears start to spawn in. Because it wouldn't be a level in a Serious Sam game without at least one arena up against these things, where you spend the entire time circle strafing whilst holding down the left mouse button. Gotta say though, this one does get extra points for being meta and self-aware.
I knew it! There ain't no games without sewer levels.
But even still, ironically including a sewer level is still including a sewer level. It is a pretty forgettable level otherwise though, and again it's kinda short, but also somehow is one of the most normal and sensible levels in the entire campaign, which is really saying something considering how batshit insane the rest of the game is. Nothing else though, it did remind me how much I love those water effects from video games back in the early 2000s. Alright, well speaking of games from the early 2000s, next up we've got Romero's infamous Daikatana. And look, you've really got to hand it to this guy for just how much he fucked up the opening of this game.
Whoa, what was that all about?
I mean, the first level takes place in a swamp with all of these dragonflies, frogs and crocodiles to deal with, most of whom can poison you. That alone is enough to turn anyone off. But then the absolute madman follows it up with a goddamn sewer level, and really what's not a very good sewer level either.
Whoa.
So now, along with dealing with all of these dragonflies, frogs and crocodiles, now you're up against these guys in big armoured suits that fire off these really damaging projectiles, in these narrow tunnels that often aren't conducive to mobility. And even the doors in this sewer can kill you. I mean, look at that. The door closed and it killed me.
Bullshit!
What was that all about?
And I love too how there's fruit growing down here that you can somehow eat to regain your health. Yeah, anyone up for some sewer melons?
Bullshit!
Now, if you've played Daikatana, you'll know that your weapons change with each new time period. And it doesn't help either that the weapons for this time period are all just kinda lame. All you'll have for this level are your gauntlets, which are kinda useless. The Ion Blaster, which you can't even shoot underwater because it damages you, and then a C4 launcher that's going to damage you as much as it does the enemies. If you're secret hunting though, you can find the Shot Cycler a little bit earlier than normal, which is one of the most bizarre guns ever. It's a shotgun that can only be fired in full auto mode, bursting off 6 shots automatically. Because, I don't know, I guess a single fire shotgun is for pussies. I do think that Daikatana improves in the second and the third chapter, but this first one is just so god-awful and an instant reminder why this game flops so hard on launch. One saving grace for this level though is the Dopefish secret, which I gotta admit is kinda cool, and it harks back to the days where that thing was a bit of a running gag and an inside joke between developers. But a note to any aspiring developers out there, don't start your game off with a swamp and a sewer level back to back. In fact, you know what? Just don't include those levels at all. A lot of the environments you move through in Lost in Vivo are open to interpretation, as the entire game takes place in the imagination of someone going through intense therapy. But the opening of the game is a watershed moment for the story, when your poor dog is washed down the gutter and you're then heading off into the sewers to find it. Things start off pretty normal, but it doesn't take too long before that Silent Hill influence starts to rear its nightmarish head, and it becomes pretty obvious you're not in Kansas anymore. You get what I think is one of the game's best jump scares. Then you're moving past a rogue gallery of these hideous looking monsters. It plays on claustrophobia, it plays on the fear of the dark, putting you in these narrow and dimly lit environments. And it's such a creepy sequence that's still somehow only really touching the surface of all of the messed up stuff you're going to see in the remainder of the game. Lost in Vivo isn't the longest game, but it's definitely one that's going to linger in your mind long after you've stopped playing. I feel like whenever you do any kind of video list for standouts in first-person shooters, be it best weapon, best level design, best protagonist, or best usage of Army of Darkness quotes, Blood always seems to manage to find its way in. It's just a game that encapsulates so many hallmark aspects of what we love about first-person shooters. And yeah, it finds its way into this video because of course it has its very own sewer level in the third episode called Raw Sewerage. Yeah, they weren't beating around the bush with that one. This one actually starts off kinda tricky. You've got to move through this underwater section with a pretty strict air supply, dodging a bunch of gill beasts and bone eels along the way. Then you're really up shit creek, dealing with Tommy gun cultists, butchers, zombies, and spiders, which is really gonna make you wish you found that napalm launcher on the previous level.
That's all.
Then after that, there's even more swimming, dealing with a bunch of zombies as you try to find the skull key, before a shootout in a room full of cultists, which is a bit of a reminder as to how brutal the hit-scanning enemies can be at times. There is some pretty cool looking architecture in this level though. I think this machine thing you grab one of the keys from looks awesome. The animated textures and the air bubble sprites underwater also reinforces that feeling of you moving through these dank, smelly shit encrusted passages. And it's the closest you can get to being inside a sewer without getting your feet wet. And of course, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree because the sequel, Blood 2, has its own sewer level too. In fact, I guess technically it has two. Yeah, there's a sewer level you move through early on in the game, having to turn off a few leaky steam pipes, and then later on, you also have to move through a full-on sewage plant. Now look, Blood 2 may be a lot of things, a great game being not one of them, but if nothing else, you can't fault it for sticking to FPS traditions. You've got to hand it to Valve for Half-Life 2. They not only brought the first-person shooter into the 2000s with a brand new Source engine, but also introduced physics heavily to the gameplay, redefining the way we approached combat with weapons like the grav gun. So what better way to kick off Gordon Freeman's messianic journey than by running through the sewers and canals of City 17? Yeah, the aptly named Root Canal, the first proper chapter in Half-Life 2, has Gordon under-equipped and on the run from the Combine soldiers and a goddamn chopper that's trying to hunt him down. You'll move above and below the surface, avoiding ambushes, head crabs, environmental hazards, and those ever-annoying manhacks.
Surprise, motherfucker!
Along with Valve reminding us that they've got a physics engine in the game. Yes, we get it, you made a seesaw. It's also a pretty cool way to introduce us to the gameplay in a low threat but still dangerous environment, along with making the world seem overbearing and hostile. And nothing makes a man more humble than having him run away from what's basically a bunch of razor blades on wings. Now, despite having the moniker of being a sewer level, you actually get to see sunlight for a fair bit of this chapter, which kinda makes it the Diet Coke of sewer levels. It does take place mostly underground though, but the variety with the environments is handled pretty well, so that most of the time you might not even notice that you're playing a sewer level, but your brain did. Dishonored is also another game that has a sewer level really early on in its campaign, and the other reason I'm including it right after Half-Life 2 is that this one also had the same art director, a dude named Viktor Antonov. And again, there's just something so effortless about how this one has been constructed, and it just captures the tone of this depressing, plague-ridden city perfectly. You also learn from a gameplay perspective that the rats of Dunwall are going to eat any corpse that's thrown in front of them. You also get Corvo's crossbow and his folding blade, which are two items that get put to use more here than salt and pepper. And it's all so well thrown together that you kind of forget that you're moving through the bowels of the city, stepping over puddles filled with the bodily fluids of complete strangers. And yeah, I never thought that I'd like a sewer level that also doubles as a tutorial, and yet, here we are. Mirror's Edge is another game set in the not too distant future where you're playing as a protagonist evading a totalitarian force. This time you're playing as Faith Connors, a freerunner / courier outrunning the man. This level is also kind of unique because it's the only one in this video that features almost exclusively platforming. Yeah, Mirror's Edge still manages to be one of the best first-person parkour games ever made. Not to mention, I think, winning the award for the most traumatic depiction of someone falling to their death you're ever going to see in a video game. I mean, it still makes me sweat. You start off on the surface, having to avoid a chopper as you run through the canals. Yeah, sounds familiar. But soon you'll descend into a storm drain and then the sewers beneath the city, having to do a bit of navigation down ledges along with avoiding snipers. And once you finally get back to the surface, you're then greeted by cops armed with shotguns. Fun. Visually though, I think this is one of the best looking sewers on this entire list. The lighting and the water effects just look great, and there's something so oddly calming and serene about the simplicity of the architecture. So if nothing else, it does make for a nice backdrop as you're leaping over walkways and avoiding these fatal drops to the slimy concrete below.
Fracture detected.
Jumping back to the 90s again, we've got a sewer level in Dark Forces, LucasArts' underappreciated first-person shooter set before the events of Episode 4. In fact, the first mission even opens with you stealing the plans for the Death Star. Anyway, they really tried to pull the bantha wool over our eyes here by calling this one the Subterranean Hideout, which is the worst attempt at subterfuge I've ever heard. It's like when a real estate agent says that a house that backs onto a train line is close to public transport. This is also, I think, one of the trickiest sewer levels in this entire video. And the thing that makes this one so challenging is that for a lot of it, you're in near pitch darkness, but it also just has a very confusing layout. You've got to go through a bunch of separate tunnels, press a bunch of buttons and switches, and then play around with the water levels so you can move on to the next area of the map. And it's not really immediately obvious what you're supposed to be doing.
It's all pipes!
But again, they really do capture that feeling of swimming through excrement the whole time. I mean, look at the muck in this joint. You'd really want to make sure you've had your multivitamin before going into this place. Now, whilst this level is definitely one of the most infamous sewer levels of all time, I still don't consider it to be the worst. And I think the honour for that has to go to the sewer level in Redneck Rampage.
I'll bet this place just crawling with their damn shit monkeys.
Yeah, I gotta say that everything else just pales in comparison to what Yatrix Entertainment spurned onto the world with this one, aptly just named Sewers. Redneck Rampage has confusing level design as it is, but this one really just shows the apex of how bad that can actually be. For starters, the only enemy you're fighting in the entire level are these little monsters that are literally made out of shit. Their primary attack consists of throwing shit, or killing themselves and exploding into a pile of shit. Yeah, they're called turd minions for a reason. The noises they make consist of a really annoying giggle, and then just repeating the same word over and over. And by the end of this level, that's going to be burned into your goddamn brain. For some reason too, the hit detection, which isn't even great at the best of times in this thing, seems to spaz out whenever these guys are in the water, so a lot of your shots are also just going to randomly miss. As a result, you ain't going to hit shit, pun intended. To find your way out of here, you've got to find and activate a bunch of different buttons which open up gates and locked doors, but it's never apparent which button does what, so you're going to be running back and forth constantly trying to find the way ahead. A lot of your time is also spent underwater as well, which kinda limits your field of view as the item you're using to breathe, which looks like a welding mask with a vacuum hose, takes up a significant amount of the screen. The lighting is also pretty minimal, which at least does make sense considering your surroundings, but everything also looks very similar too, which makes navigation even more confusing. It's just not a very fun level to navigate through, and whenever I'd replay this game, as rare as that was, I'd often just no-clip my way straight to the exit. So if you're wondering why people don't talk about Redneck Rampage in the same way they talk about other build engine games like Duke Nukem and Blood, well, this level is a perfect example as to why that is. Well, I think that's probably enough talk about sewers for the time being, and it might be time for me to come back to the surface and get some fresh air. Sewer jokes, I love them.
Whoa.
This has been a really fun video to make, and it really is true that misery loves company. So feel free to share any other sewer levels you can think of, be it FPS or even non-FPS, in the comments section. And as always, if you liked this video and would like to see more just like it, well, be sure to let me know. Thanks for watching.